Hello y'all, welcome back to today's video. In today's video we're doing another, in a sense, history lesson where we're taking back previous elections. This time, as you take a look on your screen, we're doing the 1972 election, but that's the only election we're starting off with. This video, as you see by the title, is actually an election prediction, or not an election prediction, but a historical review on how states have voted in the past, and then by what margins of what margins they voted for. And so, starting off in this video, we're gonna be starting with the election of 1972. But right before we start, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a like, you could comment out any suggestions for new videos, and I hope you could consider subscribing to this channel, because I always appreciate people subscribing and actually watching my videos. And go check out yesterday's video, which was an election not an election prediction, but an historical review of how states have voted in the past year. So this is essentially just going more in depth into that video. So go check out that video and then come back to this video. So I'll give you some time. Alright, now let's get on with this video. And so as you take a look, again, this was the election of 1972. As we know, it was a blowout for Richard Nixon. He had 419 electoral votes safely in his column. Majority, again, safe Republican states, but he made a lot of inroads again with the Watergate scandal, which they essentially found Democratic tactics and other things they were planning to do. So he did very well in the Rust Belt, which was usually, or in Michigan, Pennsylvania, as well as in the West Coast, which specifically Washington and Oregon, which were considered lean Democratic states. New York even won, and again, like states like Wisconsin and Minnesota, which are usually Democratic states, voted Republican due to, again, George McGovern being perceived to be as a socialist maniac. But now moving on into the 1976 election, again, you can definitely take you can tell the difference of how much red to how much blue, and how much to lean, by how much these states voted by. You see a lot of these states voting by less than 5%, especially here in the Rust Belt, where the election was essentially decided. And in the South, you actually see more shades of red. But this is where the first sign of Democratic inroads into the West Coast you start seeing, as you see 145 states only voted by 5% for Gerald Ford, and 153 electoral votes voted for Jimmy Carter within 5%. Because again, this was a time where the government was where people weren't sure of the government and didn't trust the government at the time, so a lot of people were split around who to vote for. But Jimmy Carter again did end up winning selection by winning many states, even by a little margin. Did end up winning, but as we know, in 1980, that was only a short time where that happened, where again Jimmy Carter got landslided, lost in the biggest landslide an incumbent president has lost by in 1980. Ronald Reagan won a landslide. He essentially brought the solid Great Plains and West Coast. Again, California was his home state. He won Oregon, Washington, the west side of the country. The South, which was, again, you see a lot of southern states voting barely for Ronald Reagan, because again, Jimmy Carter was in that area. Georgia voted reliably for him. West Virginia, Maryland, and Minnesota narrowly voted for Jimmy Carter. But besides that, again, D.C. and Rhode Island rarely vote Republican, except D.C. never voted Republican. But if you do take a look in the Northeast, New York to Maine, a lot of lean states that only voted for 5%. But in the Rust Belt, you see more solid Republican states, which was a good thing for Republicans. And you see Ronald Reagan solidified that base in the next election. He solidified all of the Great Plains states, all these southern states, the New England states, and the Rust Belt states. Again, Walter Mondale, Jimmy Carter's vice president, only carried 13 electoral votes. His home state of Minnesota, which again only voted by about less than 1%, and D.C., which has never voted for a Republican. But nevertheless, most of these states voted Republican. All except one of these states voted Republican. Solidly, about 40 voted Republican. And yeah, not much to talk about. Again, in 1988, California, the biggest prize in the nation, started to is another place where you see Democratic inroads. But despite that, you see Michael Dukakis still losing by a big landslide to George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, excuse me, who was Ronald Reagan's vice president at the time, who was elected president. Again, West Virginia was starting to turn more Republican. Only voted for Michael Dukakis by a short margin. Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin were considered safe Democratic states. New York was a toss-up state along with Massachusetts and Rhode Island, as well in the West Coast in Washington and Oregon. But as you take a look, most of the South was considered state for Bush, the Great Plains, California, and this was the last time a Republican did very well in the Rust Belt, even winning states until 2016. But in the next election, we know what happened. You do have Ross Perot, independent, who carried about 19% of the vote, I believe 18.9% actually, of the vote nationwide. So you actually see a lot of states that voted for either Bill Clinton or George W. Bush, or George H.W. Bush narrowly. But as you see, California actually did flip, as well as the West Coast, and a lot of the Great Plains switched to lean Republican, and some states even flipped to the Democrats. New England, this was the first election that turned blue and has stayed blue. The Rust Belt again has stayed blue until again 2016, and Bill Clinton, being a governor from Arkansas, won a lot of the South again. He essentially was Jimmy Carter 2.0 in bringing the South back, but again, this was a year where an independent Ross Perot ran. So Republicans had hope in the next election, but as you do take a look, that was actually not to be the case. Bill Clinton ended up actually solidifying and increasing his margin of victory. Again, losing Montana, losing Georgia, but winning the state of Florida, where he already gets and Colorado, where he already gets all of his losses back. But he also did carry the state of Arizona again. You don't see many lean states for Bill Clinton. You see more likely and dark states that voted for from 10 to 15% for Bill Clinton. And so, nothing really much to talk about here. Another landslide for Bill Clinton, but a lot to talk about here in the year 2000 once again. You have not many solid states. Again, you have most of the solid states for the Democrats in New England, from Maryland to Massachusetts, New York. And most of the Republicans, George W. Bush's, Bush 43's, solid states in the Great Plains, in this area of the center of the country, and in the South. But if you do take a look, you do see the margin. You see how many states turned from blue to red. Again, states like Nevada, Arizona, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Louisiana. Could go on and on. How many states flipped and narrowly for George W. Bush. Again, he had a majority of his states won by less than 10%. So this was Al Gore. So this was a very close election. Again, Al Gore did win the popular vote, but George W. Bush won the Electoral College. And now moving on to the 2004 election, most of these states that were solid for Democrats in New England, most of the solid states in the South for the Republicans, and in the Great Plains. And essentially the same thing as in 2000. You just see Democratic base actually, sorry about that. Jumping ahead too much. But you actually see the Democratic base weaken actually, with Democrats losing New Mexico and Iowa again narrowly. But you see the Rust Belt, you start seeing cracks in the blue wall in the Rust Belt, in the New England area, and in the West Coast. Most states for the Democrats actually weren't decided pretty easily. Again, Oregon was considered a toss-up state. Pennsylvania was considered a toss-up state, but again, John Kerry did hold them. But George W. Bush in the end did end up winning this election. Again, Florida going narrowly, Ohio going narrowly, and yeah. But again, as we know, when the Great Recession hit in the second term of George W. Bush, and he was very unpopular, this led for a Democratic landslide to come in the next election, with Barack Obama, our first African American president, already having 212 electoral votes. solidly. Again, on the West Coast in New England. And in the Rust Belt, which is surprising, he already had a lot of solid states. And there were actually a lot of polls that already showed him above the 270 needed before Election Day. Again, Pennsylvania was a state John McCain needed to win, which again, as we know, he did not. He won again, Indiana, Ohio, and Florida, as well as North Carolina, very narrowly. But he solidified his base in the West Coast in New England, and in the Rust Belt. Again, most of these states weren't actually close, so nothing much really to talk about here. Just oh yeah, but this was the first election actually that Missouri did not vote for the winner. It ended its bellwether state status in about 100 years. But moving on to the next election in 2012, you don't really see a change. You just see him lose Indiana and North Carolina. His base in the Rust Belt was weakened. He won it by less than 10 points. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Iowa, and he did carry key states like Nevada, Colorado, actually pretty handily. And he won again 3 big states in Ohio, Virginia, and Florida, states that Mitt Romney needed to win if he wanted to win the White House. But as we know, he did not. And coming up to our final election, this was again a very close one. But as you do take a look, we know that Hillary Clinton did lose this election to Donald Trump. He defied the polls, he defied the pollsters, and as you take a look, a lot of it was here in the Rust Belt. As you see, most of these 101 electoral votes were in the Rust Belt and in toss-up states where he needed to win. For example, he flipped the Rust Belt back to the Republicans for the first time since 1988. He won Florida, he won North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. He actually won Iowa and Ohio, traditional toss-up states, pretty handily by about 10 points. Arizona, Texas, I could go on and on. But basically, this nation has changed a lot in the past 50-ish years, 40 years. And if you take a look, going from the first landslide, Republican landslide, all the way to here, to another Republican victory, but both sides being weakened, definitely. But yeah, if you did enjoy this video, I hope you do leave a like, do comment down any suggestions, and do hopefully consider subscribing, and yeah, comment down any suggestions, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.